Jack juggled the box of kitchen utensils as he struggled to unlock the door to their new apartment. It was a modest place, a little worn around the edges, but it was theirs. His girlfriend Livia followed behind him, balancing a stack of picture frames and throwing him a teasing smile. "Don't drop the knives, Jack. That's bad luck for a new place," she said with mock sternness. "Why are you carrying frames while I get the sharp stuff?" he quipped back. "Because you insisted on being the muscle, remember?" she said, sticking her tongue out. He grinned, letting the door swing open. They stepped inside, gazing at their future. Moving in together was supposed to be the start of something wonderful. They had been dating for 2 years, and this felt like the natural next step. Over the weeks that followed, they fell into a routine, cooking dinner together, arguing over whose turn it was to do the dishes, and staying up late binge-watching shows. But soon things started to change. It began subtly, so much so that Jack almost didn't notice at first. Livia, always cheerful and energetic, started retreating into herself. She would disappear on Saturday evenings, claiming it was a girls' night out with her friends. At first, Jack didn't question it. After all, she deserved her own time just as much as he did. But the excuses started to feel thin. Whenever she returned, there was something off about her. Her eyes seemed glassy, her voice distant. When he asked if she had fun, her responses were short and her smile looked strained. One Saturday, Jack decided to press her. "Who are you meeting up with? Anyone I know?" Livia avoided his gaze, busying herself with putting on a coat. "No one you'd know. It's just some old friends from college." Jack frowned. "You've never mentioned them before." She sighed, exasperated. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? I'm just going out. Can I have a little space?" The tension in her voice silenced him, but the unease lingered. Something wasn't right. The following Saturday, Jack decided he couldn't take the gnawing suspicion any longer. When Livia left around 8 p.m., he grabbed his jacket and followed her. She walked briskly through the city, her pace purposeful. Jack kept his distance, ducking behind corners and pretending to check his phone whenever she glanced around. His stomach churned as she turned down a dimly lit street he didn't recognize. At the end of it stood a large building with no sign or markings, its windows glowing faintly. Livia entered, greeted by someone at the door. Jack slipped closer, his heart pounding. He waited for the door to close before he approached, peeking through a crack in the heavy curtains. Inside was a room filled with people sitting in a circle, their heads bowed. At the front stood a tall, commanding man in a white robe, his arms raised as he spoke. His voice was muffled, but his tone was hypnotic, almost sermon-like. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Livia sat among the congregation, her face illuminated by the flickering candlelight. She looked transfixed. Livia returned home late, smelling faintly of incense. Jack was waiting on the couch, his arms crossed. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "Jack," she sighed, hanging up her coat. "I told you, girls' night." "Don't lie to me," he snapped, standing up. "I followed you, Livia. I know you've been going to whatever that place is." Her face paled, her eyes widening. "You followed me," she whispered, as if the idea was unthinkable. "Yes, because you've been acting so strange lately." "What is that place? Who was that man?" Her expression hardened. "It's none of your business." Jack stared at her, stunned. "None of my business? You're my girlfriend, Livia. If something's going on with you, of course it's my business." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You don't understand. They've helped me, Jack. I feel safe there. They understand me in a way you never could." His heart broke at her words. Safe from what? But she shook her head and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Over the next week, Jack noticed Livia pulling further away. She spent more time in their room, texting people he didn't know, her mood shifting between distant and defensive. Determined to help, he began researching the group. After hours of digging through online forums, he found others who had encountered it. The group called the Sanctuary was labeled by some as a cult. They preyed on vulnerable people, offering them a sense of belonging while gradually isolating them from their loved ones. Their leader, Livia, was particularly skilled at manipulation. Jack felt a surge of urgency. He couldn't stand by and let Livia be drawn further into their web. One night, Jack took a different approach. He cooked Livia's favorite dinner, spaghetti carbonara, and set the table with candles. When she hesitantly emerged from the bedroom, he smiled warmly. "No lectures tonight," he promised. "Just us." She softened slightly, sitting down across from him. As they ate, he steered the conversation to lighter topics, reminiscing about their first date and the road trips they had taken. Slowly, her guard lowered. "I miss this," she admitted, twirling her fork. "I miss us." "So do I," Jack said gently. "But I feel like I'm losing you to something I don't understand." Her eyes filled with tears. "You wouldn't understand. You didn't grow up the way I did." "Then help me understand," he said. "I want to." Livia began to talk. Her words came haltingly at first, but soon they spilled out like a dam breaking. She told him about her childhood, her father, a raging alcoholic who would disappear for days, leaving her and her mother to fend for themselves. She described the nights she spent crying in her room, praying for someone to save her. "When I found the sanctuary," she said, her voice trembling, "it felt like they were answering those prayers. They told me I could let go of the pain, that I didn't have to carry it anymore." Jack reached for her hand. "You don't have to carry it alone, Livia. But you don't need them to let it go. You need real help from people who care about you, not people who want to control you." She looked at him, searching his face. "I don't know if I can." "You can," he said firmly, "and I'll be with you every step of the way." Convincing Livia to leave the congregation wasn't easy. She had to confront the hold they had on her, which meant facing the unresolved trauma that had drawn her to them in the first place. With Jack's support, she began seeing a therapist who was specialized in trauma and dependency. As the weeks passed, the fog that had enveloped her began to lift. She started talking more openly with Jack, sharing memories she had buried for years. Each conversation brought them closer, rebuilding the bond that the sanctuary had nearly destroyed. One day, as they walked through a park hand in hand, Livia stopped and turned to Jack. "You were right," she said quietly. "The sanctuary wasn't about helping me. It was just another way of running from the pain." Jack squeezed her hand. "You were brave enough to face it. That's what matters." Through Livia's journey, Jack came to understand something profound. Her dependency on the sanctuary wasn't a weakness. It was a symptom of deeper wounds. And those wounds couldn't be healed with quick fixes or false promises. They required patience, honesty, and sometimes painful introspection. "All dependencies are linked to trauma," Livia said one evening as they sat together on their balcony. "It's not just about breaking free from what you're dependent on. It's about healing what made you dependent in the first place." Jack nodded, wrapping an arm around her, and no one should have to face that alone. As they watched the city lights twinkle below, they both felt a sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were walking it together, and that made all the difference.